in Deuteronomy chapter 8, we see that the Lord tells the Israelites as he's bringing them into the land. He says in verse 6, "Therefore thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God and walk in his ways and to fear him. For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, fountains, depths of the springs, out of the valleys and the hills." In verse 8 it says, "A land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey." And then again he mentions in verse 10, "For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, which he has given thee." This was not just any land, and sometimes growing up I thought of the area of Israel as being somewhat barren, but it is a very fruitful land. It produces a lot of rich foods. And we want to particularly look at this segment in verse 8, a land of wheat, barley, and vines. We want to look at grapes, and of the olive oil, and of honey. The book of Numbers talks about the spies that go into the promised land. And in Numbers chapter 13 and verse 21, it says they bring back a branch with one cluster of grapes, and it was between two men on a staff. And some people will say, well, the Bible's in error here because it's talking about these great big grapes. But it's talking about a cluster of grapes that is from one branch, if you look at that specifically there. The Guinness Book of Records, I looked it up, the largest cluster of grapes in current time is around 21 pounds for a single small cluster. But grapes do produce on one branch, one giant where multiples of these little clusters are on one branch, and they have to be mounted on poles to hold them up. And I believe that is what is being discussed here in the scripture. They also come back and say that it's a land that flows with milk and honey. So we want to talk about some of these food products and what God is giving them, the good of the land. If you look at the Mayo Clinic's website and looking there at the grapes, there was a study done some time ago that if you drink a glass of wine every day, it will improve your heart health and less chance of having a heart attack. And more recent studies have said that that study was somewhat skewed because people that can afford to drink a glass of wine with a meal tend to eat better. And so you can't necessarily pin everything to say, well, the glass of wine is going to prevent me from having a heart attack every day and give people an excuse to drink. The Mayo Clinic suggests that pure grape juice, red or purple grapes, give pretty much the same benefits, as far as they can tell in their studies, as that of red wine. It reduces the risk of blood clots in their studies. It lowers the density of your LDL cholesterol, your bad cholesterol. It prevents damage in the blood vessels of your heart. It helps maintain a healthy blood pressure. And it is high in antioxidants. And most of these things are found in the skin, in the stem, in the leaf, and in the seeds of the grape. So when the grape is processed, the pulp is good for dietary purposes, but most of the antioxidants that you're finding are in the other places other than the pulp, and therefore the juice is good for that. We see that wine or juice, that fruit of the vine, is the staple drink of the Israelites. Now, in the Old Testament, we know that the Israelites were captive in two different lands. The first one, of course, being Egypt. The staple drink of the Egyptians is beer, not wine. And that's interesting to take note of. And then in Mesopotamia, Babylon, again, the staple drink is beer because they grow more grains in those areas. But Even though the Israelites grew grain, they grew it for bread, and the grapes were used for drink. Much of the water would be polluted, and therefore water was not always the safest to drink. And we didn't have many of the stringent cleaning methods, filtration methods for water that we use today. Grapes were grown, and they were had to be highly maintained. An ancient grape press looked much like what you would see today. The straps here where you would hold on to, you could have two people pressing grapes at the same time. They knew how to build to have the vines grow. The reason I bring this up is recently someone told me that in the ancient world, they would let the grapes just grow on the ground. And that's just not true, because there are plenty of archaeological evidences where we see that they knew how to grow grapes. The Romans especially had trellises. We see scriptures where they hedge about the vineyards and tend to them, and they are very attentive to the growing of the grape. So they have grapes there in the good of the land for health. Next, we want to talk about olives. Olives have been a symbol of peace throughout all the cultures of the Mediterranean world and Asia Minor, throughout all of the ancient recorded material that we find. They also were an important food source. They were also used in medicine and health purposes in the ancient world as well as today. They're used then as now in cosmetics. The Romans did not use soap, but they used oil to cleanse their skin, and they would scrape the olive oil over their skin in their public baths. It was used in the treating of lumber, and it was, of course, was used as a fuel. It was used to light lamps, and it was the fuel of the ancient world. In Genesis chapter 8, we see verses 6 through 11 that the dove brings the olive branch back to Noah. And of course, it is a symbol in the ancient world, both of those two together, as peace. In the court of the tabernacle in Exodus chapter 27 and verse 20, pure olive oil had to be beaten to light the lamp there in the tabernacle, in the court of the tabernacle. That term there, beaten, there are 4 ways to harvest olives, and 3 of those were used in the ancient world. And one of those ways was to just pick up the grapes off the ground as they fell, which is not the optimal way to get the best production of your olives, because you didn't get the best value of the oil. The other way was to hand pick it, and this was very time consuming. The other way was to beat the branches with a rod or a stick to cause them to fall, and then they would quickly be picked up off the ground and not just lie there. Today they have machines that will vibrate the trees. However, it's considered not the best way to pick. It may be quicker, but it is not the best way, because they can be damaged, and then also it can damage the tree. So even though it is quicker, it is not the best way to do that. We see in Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 20, it says, when thou beatest your olive tree, and referring there to the way that they harvest those olives. In Solomon's temple, in 1 Kings chapter 6 and verse 23 and following, we see that the 2 cherubims that were 10 cubits high were made from olive wood, as well as the doors were made and then overlaid with gold, and those posts also were olive wood. Olive wood is very dense, and most likely olive trees were used at the time of the crucifixion of Christ, and there's good evidence for that. In the ancient world with the Greeks considered olive trees sacred, and they would plant olive trees around their temples and places of worship, and within the temples they would even have olive trees. Moria, the Greek word there meaning sacred, and they would have sacred groves around these temples. They had the sacred forest of Athens. And if you damaged anything in these sacred forests or any of the sacred trees near the temple of Athena, you could be put to death. And so they were very important groves to the Greeks. And we see that there were groves in Israel which were grown. And if we look at Exodus chapter 34, verse 13, it says, "You shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves." And we see groves associated with idol worship. And so it could be that olive trees were associated with this type of worship, but there was some type of grove that was sacred in the worship of these idols. And typically those are associated with Ashtoreth or Astarte. And we'll talk about in that one of our other segments. We see in Judges chapter 3, the children of Israel forgot the Lord their God, verse 7, and served Balaam and the groves. And we see that in 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 19 that Jezebel, the wife of Ahab, had 450 prophets of Baal, and of the groves, 400 of the prophets for Ashtoreth there. In Micah chapter 5, verse 14, "I will pluck up your groves that are in the midst of you and destroy them." Now that could just be referring to their normal harvest of olive trees. But some of the benefits of olives are it is good for your skin. It is known to reduce the risk of cancer. It promotes a healthy stomach lining. It aids in your digestive system. It reduces plaque in your vascular system, lowers your blood pressure, and lowers your triglycerides. I took a course from the University of Athens, and the professor, when he mentioned that olive oil lowers triglycerides, I took note and I said, I have a genetic triglyceride problem that I've had since 1995. My triglycerides have always been between 400 and 800 each time I would go, no matter what kind of medications, no matter how much fish oil I took. And so I thought, well, I'll give this a try because we typically don't use a lot of olive oil in the house. And so for 6 months, I tried to eat olive oil on a salad or this or that, but I wasn't taking it every day. And so I began to just take a bottle and a measuring cup and take about a tablespoon a day whenever I would take my vitamins. In 6 months' time, without changing any diet or exercise patterns, I went to the doctor and my triglycerides for the first time since 1995 were at 205. Doctor said, "Oh, your triglycerides are getting a little high." And I said, "That's the lowest they've been in 6 months." Then I went another 6 months and went in and my triglycerides were normal. My blood pressure was lower. And I noticed when I looked in my medicine cabinet, the Tums that were up in my medicine cabinet, I said, "Oh, I haven't used Tums since I've been taking the olive oil." Now, properties of olive oil, you'll see that when you go to the store, olive oil comes in a dark glass bottle, typically. Now, if you start going to Walmart, you see everything's in plastic bottles or PVC. PVC is not the best recommended container for olive oil because it can pick up things from the PVC. The reason that it's dark, that light damages the oil. And so the professor of my course said, I do not understand why they would ship it in a clear bottle because it damages all the properties. Now, when God brings them into the good of the land, guess how olives are stored? They're stored in jars, clay jars with lids, and they stay cool because heat damages. But they didn't know this. They didn't know this about the olive oil, and it would be sealed, so it would be well preserved. When olive oils were picked in the ancient world, they would first be placed into warm water, and the oil that would come out of the olives then would be skimmed off, and then that would be your purest olive oil. Then it would be taken to a Gethsemane, an olive press is what the word means, and they would be put first in a Gethsemane, something like this, and they would be crushed, and then that oil would be gathered, and that would be a second grade. Then you would have another type of Gethsemane, a press that used weight, and would took the remainder of the olive residue that was left from the skin, and it would be put into bags, and these bags would be put on the press and weights be put on, and then that would be probably used for your oil for your lamps, and that was a lesser grade. So for the cooking grade would be the skimmed. It's not to be stored in sunlight. Heat damages it. And we see in the ancient world, the picking and processing methods are that which are best used today. When buying olive oil, the Mediterranean countries, Athens, Italy, Morocco, have a higher standard of the way these things are produced and processed. So I would recommend to get the most out of your olive oil to buy from those countries. Now, finally, I want to talk about honey. It was a health and food source in the ancient world. It was a medicinal remedy. It was also used in the idolater worship in their rituals and sacrifice. And many of the honeys that you might go out to look at in the supermarket today, they're having a problem because many of those honeys are no more than syrup. And if you want to get the best honey, I recommend that you go to a local producer of honey to get your honey from. Raw, unfiltered honey has the best properties. And if you look at these 2 jars of honey here that I have, and if you notice the contrast, although both of these honeys are good and all contain the same elements, the darker varieties have more of these elements, such as potassium, sodium, iron, magnesium, and so on, than do the lighter ones. And so it's used as a moisturizer even today in hand creams. One ancient recipe, honey was used in egg yolks as an anti-aging mask. It has an antibiotic and antibacterial effects. It's an anti-inflammatory. And it also helps maintain, believe it or not, a good oral hygiene. Pliny, the Roman author and scientist, wrote that honey combined with fish can facilitate the healing of infected wounds. And they used that in the ancient world. Hippocrates believed that honey was an expert, could relieve the cough. And where do we find that today? It's in all of our cough drops and those things, and also used as a inhaling solution for common colds in the ancient world. Greek warriors drank a mixture called kykeon. It was a mixture of water, barley, herbs, and cheese, and honey, and they would eat that before they would go into battle to boost their endurance before a battle. The Roman poet Ovid claimed that healthy diet consisted of milk and honey pies with thyme. And notice the biblical literature, a land flowing with milk and honey. Aristotle believed that it prolonged human life. Democritus lived to be an age of 100 by consuming it daily. When asked what he contributed his old age to, he said, by taking honey every day. Hippocrates, at age 107, had honey in his diet daily. And Galen, a Roman physician and philosopher at Pergamum, that was there at the Escapulus, where medicine was studied, used it as an antidote for many poisons. But Jonathan heard not when his father charged the people with the oath. Wherefore he put the end of the rod that was in his hand and dipped it in a honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. The Hebrew word there for enlightened was, it made him mentally alert. And we see there the biblical symbolism, a land flowing with milk and honey, used 20 times in the Old Testament. In Proverbs chapter 24, verse 13, in writing there, Solomon says, my son, eat thou honey, because it is good, and the honeycomb, which is sweet to thy taste. And then in 25:16 of Proverbs, he says, hast thou found honey? Eat so much as sufficient for you, lest you be filled therewith and vomit it. And then in Psalms 19, the psalmist there in 19 verse 10, more to be desired are they, the words of God, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. And then Psalms 119, 103, how sweet are thy words unto my taste, yes, sweeter than honey to my mouth. The good of the land that God promised the people, honey, representing wisdom, the love of God's word, mental alertness and longevity, olives, peace, healing, virtue, and most likely it was an olive tree that Jesus was nailed to there outside the walls of Jerusalem. The fruit of the vine representing blood. And without the shedding of blood, it says, the Hebrew writer says in 9:22, there is no remission of sins. And so we have the grape instituted into the Lord's Supper, representing that blood of Jesus Christ. So we remember these things. And so when you see the good of the land and how it benefited the Israelites physically, and then the symbolism of those items heal us spiritually today. Thank you.